Today I'm going to cover what you need to know if you want to make some old school West Coast beats. So as you heard with the beat in the intro, the type of G-Funk I'm going to be covering in today's video is the smoother style. The Battle Cat, Warren G, more laid back type of G-Funk, and some of the key ideas that you should know if you want to make this style of beat. Let's start off with tip number one, which is keys. These beats are typically built by using a number of different sounds, but many of the sounds will end up being some type of piano. In this beat, almost every single musical element is a key, so let's take a look at these one by one. And by the way, if you enjoy my videos, think about subscribing because it really does help my channel out. First off, we have the Fender Rhodes here. These show up pretty often in these types of beats, but I would advise being a little bit more meticulous and looking through different presets because not all Fender Rhodes are equal. For example, you can hear how this one sounds that I used. Very simple chord progression here. Also notice that I use the strumming function in order to help this sound a little bit more lively. So instead of having everything absolutely quantized, all I did was I used strumming. So this is something that you can think about including yourself. But you can hear just how different this is going to sound if I just chose a different preset. This doesn't sound quite as robust and full, so starting with a good sound will help as always. But if you want some other ways to improve your sound, a great way to help your Fender Rhodes sound better is to use a bit of reverb and some processing tools like chorus or flangers or phasers. It can just help make your sound feel a little bit more full if you're stuck in a jam and don't have any good sounds in your library. But again, starting with a good sound is always going to be your best option. The next musical layer that we have here are even more keys. This time though, it's going to be an acoustic piano. This is yet another preset that I got, this time from Expand, which is a plugin that I always recommend to newer producers. It's really inexpensive and has some great sounds in it. Now what's interesting about these beats is that they have a very clean, very polished sound to them. And that's unlike the more old school East Coast sounding beats that have a little bit more grit. These beats just don't have that as much. So what I did with these sounds that I showed you guys so far is that I EQ'd a lot of the frequencies to remove many of the overlap. That got rid of a lot of the muddiness that can be great depending on the aesthetic that you're going for. So if I turn off all my EQs, you can hear the difference. Without EQs, this does sound a lot more full and warm, and with EQ, the sounds feel a little bit more thin, yet a little bit more distinct from one another. But that might be something that you actually do want if you're going for a cleaner sounding beat like we're doing here. And finally, the last layer of keys that I have in this beat, we have this little sound that I really liked here. Nothing really special here, it's actually the exact same sound from my first layer, my chords. I just played them at a much higher octave and I added a bunch of reverb to them. Next, let's move on from these keys and take a look at the low end. Here what I used was a synth bass. If you remember from my video on the different types of basses that you can use in your beats, you know what I'm referring to here. This type of shorter, truncated synth bass is very synonymous with West Coast beats. Here I'm just using this preset in Omnisphere, this classic Juno bass here, but what I did was I reduced a lot of the higher frequencies. Otherwise, this is how this beat would have sounded. Now this type of bass with all of its richness in the high end is also a staple of G-Funk, albeit a different kind. And so what I did here was I just cut a lot of those high frequencies because I wanted to make something a little bit more smooth and clean. So getting rid of those frequencies that are a little bit more aggressive really helped me achieve this more smooth feel to the bass. But either way, synth basses are great for these types of beats, so check out that bass video if you haven't already. After this, we have our drums. Nothing really too amazing with these drums, I will say. With a lot of these older West Coast beats, it sounds like they relied on drum machines and they used pretty raw drum sounds from them. So you could hear I didn't do too much processing, nor did I take my drum sounds and try to get them to be more unique and a focal point in the beat. I chose really run-of-the-mill sounds here and I programmed them very typically, which again helps with this aesthetic. I don't think West Coast beats are known for having very out there complex drums. They're used a little bit more supportively in the beat rather than the focal point. And finally, we have the West Coast whistle here. But before I cover that, actually, I want to quickly run through a couple of other sounds that I have in this beat. For one, I have this guitar lick right here. Guitars can commonly show up in these types of beats. I didn't have much space for one in this beat though. I didn't want to overcrowd it, but using an electric guitar can sound great in these types of beats. Another texture that can sound great are strings. They can be a great way to make your beats sound more luscious, so I added this string patch in right here. Now these aren't really meant to sound natural like an actual string. They do have a bit of a digital synthetic feel to them, but again, that's what's common with this genre. All I did here was I just played one single note. This isn't particularly difficult to do. I just use a string preset here again. Different strings will sound different though, just like our first example. That's just a bit too piercing for me. And beyond that, I constricted this sound to sit in a very narrow space, otherwise we'd get these additional tones. So again, this speaks to getting a clean mix, just getting rid of a lot of the frequencies that might start overlapping with others. And finally, the last thing that I want to cover before the whistle, we have this Talkbox sample here. This was used in a lot of the music back then, so I just decided to throw that in there. Alright, so for the G-Funk whistle, I built this myself. There are a lot of ways you can do this, and different kinds of whistles also exist, so no one is better than the other. So this is the one that I built from scratch, and I'll show you how I did it. Alright, to build this, what you can do is open up any synth for this really. All it needs to have is the ability for you to use shapes to build sounds. For this particular type of whistle, what you want to do is start off with a saw wave. I've seen people use sines as well, which will get you a bit of a different sound, but this will still work. Next, what you're going to want to do is take yet another saw wave and stack it on top. But you want to bring this down an octave and also turn the volume a little bit down. This will help create a bit more body. The sound will be a little bit more robust at this point, whereas if I didn't have this layer, it just becomes a little bit more thick. After this, what I like to do is send these two layers in different directions using my fine tuning knob. So for this layer, I'll tune this a tiny bit up, and then this layer a little bit down. This will help create some nice detuning, something that I just personally love. Beyond this, you can play with the waveform slightly and add harmonics if you like. It's up to you. So that's mostly it for the building part. After this, what you want to do is EQ it. Once again, I removed the frequencies that I didn't need, boosted the ones that I did like about this sound, which is mostly in the higher end. And after that, I just swamped the sound with a lot of reverb and delay. And that's how I built this whistle, but there is one last thing that's really important when it comes to the actual playing of the notes. Make sure to turn on the glide or portamento, whatever your plugin refers to it as. But don't set it too high, otherwise it'll just take too long for the notes to get from one to another. You want a sort of faster glide here. So here I'm going to copy and paste this MIDI pattern into the new sound that I just built right in front of you. So that sounds good to me. And also one other thing, it's really important to throw these short little notes in to get that gliding effect. If I deleted these little notes here, you guys can hear I'm just going to have something a little bit more straightforward. But adding in these small little bending notes will help just liven things up and introduce a little bit more movement. That's pretty much it. Those are my tips for making this smoother type of G-Funk. If you guys have enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. If you're interested in more advanced beatmaking tutorials and help, head over to betterbeatmaker.com. That's where my full online course is. My free drum kit's available in the description box below, as well as a link to the Discord if you want to join my producer community. And I'll see you guys next time.